Good morning, and assalamu alaikum everyone. Zainab, I'm going to use your first name, I hope that's okay, and Wendy, I really enjoyed, because we're amongst friends today, I really enjoyed your discussion, so thank you for that. And of course, thank you to CCMW for putting together an event like this. So a little bit about me. I'm an employment and human rights lawyer, and I've been practicing for almost 19 years. And I chose and decided probably sometime around after October 7th that I wanted to advocate in a way that was authentic and aligned with my views on diversity and inclusion. And I made the personal decision to step away from advocacy of any kind that diminished or stole my peace. Please excuse my voice, I am suffering with a little bit of a head cold. My peace, my freedom, and true purpose. And in my view, as a human rights lawyer, I strongly believe that I have a great deal of responsibility to represent beliefs, sometimes as unpopular as they might be, truthfully. And in doing so, the objective for me, the objective in terms of my practice, is to help some people along the way. So why does diversity engagement in the workplace matter so much? And you'll notice that with some of the speakers, even the two from this morning, and I suspect some of the others throughout the day, there's going to be a little bit of an overlap with some nuances, of course. And I can tell you that in all the years that I've practiced law, I've focused solely on employment and human rights. And in my practice, the focus is largely on what I, as a woman in law, have seen in many, many years. I continue to see a significant amount of gender inequality. And then when you look at the group of women that I see are, bear the brunt of differential treatment in the workplace, of course, we can break it down further when looking at racialized women, when looking at women with disabilities. And despite the fact that we truly do have some wonderful allies, it simply isn't enough. Most of my employment cases have a human rights or social justice component. And outside of practicing law, I also do a significant amount of work in the diversity and inclusion space, including for my employer clients. And in helping employers foster inclusivity in their workplaces, my objective is to create workplaces on the management side that are safe for everyone. In doing that work, I've been incredibly fortunate to author a number of op-eds in the diversity and inclusion space for Canadian readers. For instance, not long ago, I wrote on the hijab ban in the Paris Olympics, where I criticized France for blocking access to the game for hijab-wearing athletes. I also wrote about, despite the fact that I'm not a sports fan, which is I know is a bit of a challenging thing to say as we all are sort of reeling from what happened with the Jays, but despite not being a huge sports fan, I've also written about the vilification of women leaders in sports, with some of the most prominent female athletes and coaches criticized as being aggressive or combative, when their male counterparts essentially are celebrated for exhibiting much of the same behavior. And of course, while staying in my lane, so to speak, from a legal perspective, I focused also on the challenge that mothers and female caregivers, and especially when those mothers and female caregivers are racialized or are women with a disability, the challenges they face, despite the fact that we do seem to have legislative entitlements that give us the rights. And I always, put the rights in, air quotes, because notwithstanding the fact that we have the legislative changes, if the culture and attitude in the workplace is still, essentially mired in those patriarchal principles that punish women and punish caregivers and punish racialized women and women with disabilities, then making the legislative changes do not matter. And I can tell you that in all of my years of practice, I have been at tables with the provincial government, with the federal government, where we're talking about legislative changes that need to be implemented. And then I'm the first to say, okay, all of that is great, except the toxic workplace, the toxic culture in the workplace is not changing. So you can make the legislative changes and do all the right things within the four corners of the legislation, but if ultimately the view in the workplace is still those who take parental leaves or caregivers that go off work essentially are going to be pulled back from their career trajectory, they're going to be ousted from promotions, left out of meetings, not receive their bonuses, then making the legislative changes simply isn't enough. So that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Diversity in the workplace may very well mean different things to different people. What diversity means to you in the workplace as an employee or as a people leader is largely going to be formed by your own individual experiences, your views, and yes, some of the unconscious bias that we are all guilty of holding. The views that we hold, that we know come from years, as we know, of social conditioning, the ones only spoken by our inner voice. And we may not say those things out loud, we may not admit that they form part of our subconscious, but I can assure you that the unconscious bias we hold will make its way to the surface. And this is incredibly concerning and particularly important, especially if you're a people leader and have people reporting to you in the workplace. So when looking at this issue of diversity and inclusion, and really there is so much to say, and you know, again, give a lawyer 15 minutes, and I'm like, 15 minutes what? Like, I could jabber away all day, but I'm going to try to stay within my time limit here. But when looking at this issue of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, we know, especially this group, we know as women, as racialized women, that when people feel honored and included at work, it is likely that they will do good work. They will say good things about their workplace. And this, as we know, will have a positive impact both on morale and productivity. And I always say it's, you know, being good to your employees is good for business. It's quite simple. So if you're not going to do it for the public policy reasons, do it so, you know, essentially there's more productivity in the workplace and it's better for your business in general. I work with many organizations that are determined to level the playing ground for women. And so in my practice, I have a plaintiff practice where I represent employees. And you know, oftentimes when I was in my younger years of practice and when I was in law school, people would often say to me, well, don't do management side work. Because you know, that's you going on the dark side, you know, helping employers and quibbling over severance and ensuring that the people that are, you know, walking out the door are given as little money as possible. And I call complete and utter bull, you know what, on that, and I'll tell you why. I am so incredibly proud of the work that I do for employer clients in Canada. I represent some of the largest employer clients in Canada, and I can tell you I work closely with their mothership, I work closely with their HR department, and I do what I can to ensure that they have practices in the workplace that are inclusive. By way of very simple example, I had a case not too long ago where I had an HR representative, senior vice president, HR representative come to me and say, look, I've got this senior employee, and you know, he's suggesting, or he's telling us that he has to go for pilgrimage. And you know, I just said to him, well, why can't you go next year? And so to sit down and have the conversation with her that the reason it's critical for him to go this year is he had a mom who's in her early 80s. She had never done Hajj before. And this was probably going to be the last year where she had the level of mobility to do the pilgrimage. And so to sit down and explain to this employer client that, you know, it's not necessarily about his calendar being better in 2026 versus 2025. It's about understanding the nuance and the beauty around doing this pilgrimage, but also taking our elders with us. And again, that is really good work. Just one example of good work that you can do in terms of educating your management side clients. If you work for an organization, and again, I'm not 100% sure as to what the makeup is in this room in terms of how many employees we have, how many people leaders we have, but I imagine it's a good mix. If you work for an organization that believes that women can only be given a seat at the table if they agree with you, you don't understand diversity in the workplace. If your workplace does not hold a space for certain challenges that disproportionately impact women and other marginalized groups, you don't understand diversity in the workplace. If you do not have a diversity mandate in your workplace, you do not understand diversity in the workplace. And most importantly, at least in my view, and this is what I find a lot of the larger employers in Canada struggle with and are guilty of, if your workplace magnifies tokenism, whereby certain individuals are publicly touted for the sole purpose of a dishonest promotion of what you want others to believe about your brand, your workplace does not understand diversity in the workplace. So if you're a female leader or are connected to female leaders, what can you do and what rights do you have? So number one, the most important I would say, is learn to spot stigma. You cannot lead the change in debunking misinformation until you recognize stigma. Except that even in the most well-meaning organizations, even they often will have roadblocks in place that prevent career progression for groups that are historically marginalized. Don't be afraid to speak up. And that, quite frankly, is, one of the most important takeaways that I often say, are in line with many of the talks that I give. There is no better advocate for you than you. This is what we know. I've worked in corporate Canada for, again, the better part of 19 years. The chances of you finding a strong advocate for yourself in the workplace when you're a woman, when you're a woman of color, when you're a woman perhaps with a disability, is low. And I'm really hoping, as I'm locked in on my 17-year-old daughter right now who's sitting right in front of me, I'm really hoping when she becomes a human rights lawyer and works at my firm, I've got all that I'm really hoping when she stands at the podium one day and talks about her human rights journey that her mother has forced on her. I hope that she will not say that it is as difficult as it is for women, racialized women who are at the receiving end of differential treatment. I hope that she will not be saying that this is still a problem, but it is still a problem. And so it is so incredibly important to advocate for yourself. Something as simple as, and it's interesting because I know there's so much in the Muslim faith that talks about humility, and it's such an important principle. Now, I will always say humility is not my strong suit. I'm working on it. But in the workplace, don't wait for someone else to talk about the great thing that you did. If you've done the great thing, talk about the great thing. Because as it stands, the chance of you finding allyship in the workplace is incredibly slim. Outside of learning to spot the stigma, it's also incredibly important to lean into relationships with those who want to be your allies. Good leadership is critical here. When leaders demonstrate good allying behaviors, something as simple as standing and saying, "I support others," it demonstrates to everyone in the workplace that being an ally is a really good thing. Where you can, educate. This is a beautiful example of that. If you have a platform, and that could be something as simple as maybe something you have on social media or access to a leader in the workplace, someone who coordinates perhaps employee workshops or activities, use it to implement initiatives with greater representation of those who have been historically marginalized in your workplace. And then of course hiring practices, I should say, are critical. Where you have control or input, put in place a diversity mandate within your hiring practices. And so we're in a bit of a funny place, and I know we've got so many amazing DEI experts here. We're suggesting, there's so much criticism around, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, suggesting somehow that there's, people with merit who are being ousted out of the process. The problem, in my view, with most DEI initiatives is that they're only brought into the workplace as a response to toxicity in that workplace and not benevolence and curiosity and accountability. And I think when we shift that focus, it stops being couched as superficial. I have been told that I have run out of time, which is always a bit of a challenge as a lawyer. I've been told I have 1 minute left. So I'm going to use that minute to ask somebody in the audience if they've got any question that they'd like to ask about my practice, some of my experiences. I don't know if there's a mic that can be circulated, if I've totally thrown everything off. On the table. Okay, I will grab it. Does anybody have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I have a question. So when it comes to power dynamics, in that situation, how do you deal with it? So we are talking about a racialized community or being a person of color, but when there is a power dynamics, you know that somebody you are talking in the hierarchy, how do you stand up and how do you maintain that relationship in terms of advocating for yourself and when things are at stake for you?
Well, I think it's a fantastic question, and it's one that comes up quite often. In my experience, I often have young lawyers that say, look, I wouldn't work at a big Bay Street firm, and notwithstanding the fact that at the junior level, or even at the junior partner level, there's a lot of racialized people, the mothership is predominantly male, the mothership is predominantly white. So in those circumstances, allyship is incredibly important. So very quick example, we'll notice post-October 7th, we see certain communities have really come together. So if you have an issue in the workplace and you need to advocate for yourself and there is this positional power dynamic as there is in most workplaces, find an ally. If that means you get 4 people copied on your email who can help, bolster your credibility in terms of raising an issue, I think that's incredibly important. Don't put yourself in a situation where you feel alone. You'd be very, very surprised if you go and discuss your issue with other peers, how many people are like, well, I wasn't gonna say it if it was just me, but now that there's 4 of us who feel the same way, let's go ahead and send that email.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Muneeza. Thank you for unpacking these unique and disproportionate challenges faced by Muslim women on the job. And it just shows us all the work we have to do still. So right now it's 10:37. We have until 10:45 to have a break, stretch your legs, get something to drink, and be back here please for 10:45. Thank you.